Continue with the conversation around the issue of expired goods in our communities. We now look at the chain value as some of the contributing factors to expired goods making way into our communities, and why exactly these expired goods find themselves in mostly poor communities. We speak to FoodForwardSA's Managing Director, Andy du Plessis, who's joining us via Zoom, as well as academic and co-author of the Township Economic Mistakes, and Letswalo, who's joining us in studio. Neo, let's start off with you. Very good morning to you. What do you make of what the Consumer Commission has found, and also that last question that I asked Prudence in relation to whether there is a link between the high inequality rate in the country, our high poverty rate, as well as a market being created to sell expired goods to?
Thank you so much for having me. I think, the most fundamental issue is that if you can look, for instance, in South Africa, the people, especially in townships, they can only afford to buy food, especially in spaza shops. So if you can look at the consumption pattern, you find that they only support only once a month, and which happens after payment. It only happens that they can only afford to go and buy at ShopRite and other, formal retail chains. But the remaining months, that's where now you find that most of them can actually depend on spaza shop businesses. So, for instance, when we were conducting research, we actually found that, the one spaza shop makes about 1,500 a day, of which it actually shows an indicative that, a lot of people can necessarily afford to spend most of their money, as many are unemployed, and they solely depend on, hand-to-mouth type of, hustle. And I think that this actually contributes towards this, the issue of affordability. For instance, if you can look at the basic nutritious food basket in ShopRite, it's actually about 3.6 for a family of 4, 3,600 for a family of 4, of which, if you can look at also, that does not necessarily correspond with the national income standard. So you find that these are the types of things that actually perpetuate the dependency on spaza shop, especially predominantly in townships.
Okay, let's bring in Andy into the conversation. Andy, your take on whether there is a link between our high inequality rate in the country. Neo has now touched on the food basket, and I saw there was a report that also indicated the food basket per individual, food products necessary to live on, costs around 1,500 Rand, and that was at the beginning of 2024. We have an SRD grant, which is 350 Rand, so we know that an individual can't really survive on that 350 Rand. But is there a link between our high inequality rate as well as seeing an increase in the number of expired food being sold at a discounted rate?
Hi, morning, Aldrin, and thanks for having us. There is an inextricable link between the level of inequality and deepening poverty and what people are purchasing in communities, buying patterns, etc. And as Neo said earlier, around 55% of our population live below the upper bound poverty line of 1,558 Rand, while the cost of a healthy food basket for a family of 4 costs in the region of 5,400 Rand. So there's an economic disparity between what people earn and what people need to learn, what people need to survive. And this is where the crux of the issue is. People don't earn enough money. Food prices have escalated over the last 5 years across South Africa. It's only just recently, last week, we saw the inflation coming down and food inflation slightly marginally coming down. But food prices remain high, so it's coming off a high base. And what we are finding is that the research is showing that around 8 million children that are on the child support grant, they don't even have access to healthy food. That's the Department of Social Development's research that they've released just a few months ago. And the United Nations released their report on food and nutrition security just last week, and they've indicated that the worst continent affected by food insecurity and malnutrition is Africa, and Southern Africa, ourselves being included, are not outside of that equation. So we are finding that because people don't earn enough money, over 19 million people in South Africa earn social grants, and a large percentage of those people do not, that's the only source of income for a family of 4, 5, 6, and more sometimes. So within a week, within 2 weeks, they run out of money to be able to secure food. And this is where they then turn to cheaper foods. The buying patterns have to change in order to survive. And they're buying anything just to fill tummies. And that's where the issue's coming in.
Yeah, and now I'm reminded now, just listening to Andy, of a story of a mother in the Eastern Cape. I think it was early this year or late last year, where she killed herself and killed the children as well because of hunger. And also understanding of how hunger is also impacting how we understand what makes the family and build on the family values.
Yes, well, I think that is the most important issue. In South Africa, we need to bear the fact of hunger, or rather malnutrition, that currently we realize in many families. So you see that there's lack of synergies between the income and the cost of living, precisely the price of food, especially nutritious food. Because of even the food that we currently rely on, if we can look at the element of nutrition, they actually, lack nutrition. Because if you can look, there was a book on the empty plate. It actually says that most South Africans are the most hungry, and the hunger is conceptualized from a perspective of nutrition. Because of most of them, they eat the junk food, which is, if you can find in townships, your kota, your chips. That is the most consumed food there, especially. But now, we need to ensure that the synergies between income, and we're going to find a lot of frustration as the unemployment rate will continue to rise, inequality continue to rise. So we're going to see the issue of people now resulting to committing suicide as a result of not affording to live. And I think that, with the current development of making poultry value tax-free, I think it's a very important indication, and there's been a lamentation for it, just to ensure that the food becomes less exorbitant for the poor of the poorest in our country, precisely the ones that are residing in rural and township areas.
Yeah, and Andy, that's actually a conversation that we will be having just after 11 o'clock, and the debate around whether or not poultry food items, or certain poultry food items, should be exempted from VAT. But then when we bring the conversation down to a nutrition conversation, that for the majority of South Africans who are poor, their basic food nutrition, that when it comes to a protein, the cheapest protein product that they can find are poultry-related products, whether it is the chicken itself or perhaps maybe the egg. Do you think that when we speak about hunger in the country, we should also look at the question around nutrition, and how do we deal with nutrition and also the pricing of nutritious foods?
Absolutely. I think this is a key factor, because an unhealthy population will be an overburden on not only on the economy of our country, but the health system as a whole. And I think it's important that we need to talk, when we do talk about hunger, we need to talk about the drivers around hunger, which leads to food insecurity, which leads to starvation, which leads to malnutrition and death. In South Africa, more than 27% of our children up to the age of 5 years are malnourished. 27%, that's almost 1/3 of all the children in South Africa that are not getting the proper nutrition that they need. A lot points to a food system that is, some say it is broken, others say the food system's priorities are quite different. But I think a large part of the reason is, in South Africa, we produce enough food to feed everyone in our country, everybody. We produce enough food. We export billions of rands of food, and that export number is going to increase this year by all indications as exports increase. So it's an issue of access to food, and it's an issue of affordability of food. And in South Africa, most South Africans, half of South Africans, around 30 million South Africans, just can't afford healthy food items. It's just too expensive. It's out of their reach. And they have to look at items that's going to fill a plate and that's going to fill a tummy.
Yeah, and as we've already said in conclusion, Andy, that the majority of the people that are affected by this are poor people. And the majority of those poor people are actually black people. If you look, for instance, at stunting, the stunting levels in this country, 27% of children under the age of 5 years have been affected by stunting. So you can only imagine the type of population that we are growing here, an unhealthy population at that. What should the solution be?
Absolutely. We are talking about Black South Africans that are poor, but that have been badly affected by this, and that's directly related to inequality and poverty in South Africa. So there's a few things that we could do. I think the first thing that needs to happen is South Africa has not yet finalized their food and nutrition security plan for the next 5 years. We are working with the Department of Land Reform and Rural Development in that regard, but that piece of work must be prioritized. That's the first thing. The second thing is that food and nutrition security plan must understand that the failures of food and nutrition security in South Africa over the previous 5 years is because government did not work with the civil society and non-profit organizations with a view to address food and nutrition security. Government does not have the infrastructure or the capacity to be able to address this problem because it's too large a scale to be able to address this. The third thing we must look at is to make sure that where there is surplus food, over 10 million tons of food in South Africa is lost or wasted. And if we intercepted that food timeously and with in-date food, we will be able to address the problem of not only food insecurity, but we would be able to eradicate malnutrition. We need to be able to recover more surplus food, and that's talking to farmers, manufacturers, and retailers across our food system.
Now, what do you think the answer is? And also when we look at the supply chain, do you think there's something that can happen there to ensure that once the food arrives at the end user, it is not too expensive?
Yes, I think first of all, there should be a correspondence between the income and also the price of food. That's one. And I also think that, the issue of nutrition is very important because of if it also affects children, as you actually hear the sentiments that, for instance, if a child doesn't get the proper nutrition within the first 3 years of their life, it actually impacts their brain development. So you can see how this thing has a negative multiplier effect in society. So 10 years, 5 years, 7 years to come, you'd find that now you are actually raising a population that is malnourished and without, proper brain development. So if you are investing in the knowledge economy as we are currently now pursuing, then you need to invest that to ensure initially the first step to ensure that young people, precisely children, have access to nutritious food so that their brain can, can develop to an extent that they can become competitive in this knowledge economy. And I also think that it's not the issue of food insecurity that we have in the country. It's the issue of affordability. So how do we then ensure that we can close the gap? Because there's a lot of food, but now you find that the inflation that is currently happening is happening deliberately by those who are currently in the supply chain by ensuring that now they're actually escalating the demand for them to increase the prices. Yeah. So I think that these particular things, it's something that can be circumvented, but there should be an intervention specifically in basic nutritious food because of we saw that previously in other countries and even in South Africa, unfortunately during apartheid, that there were commissions that ensured that there's bread commission, there's also milk, that to ensure that the basic necessities are there, to ensure that people are nourished and also people can afford or have access to basic nutritious food.
Let me quickly ask you, yes or no, do you think the food stamp approach that the Americans have could be something that we explore as a country?
Definitely, we should.
Okay. Andy, do you think that that's something that we can explore as a country?
I think that it's worth exploring, but there are certainly other avenues with low-hanging fruit that can be achieved sooner.
Okay, tell us which ones are those?
So for example, the issue around the fact that so much of our surplus food is lost or wasted across our food system, over 10 million tons. Farmers that are growing for a manufacturer or for a retailer, for example, have to have specific item that's of a very specific quality and size and look, and the food that's outside of that quality and durability is just dumped in landfills or dug in a hole somewhere. And what we need to do is, across our food system, we need to engage. South Africa has over 38,000 commercial farmers and over 200,000 small-scale farmers. If each and every one of those donated surplus food, we would be able to eradicate the problem of malnutrition, and there would be no need for food stamps. And we need to find ways to be able to make sure we get better access to food, find where the food is, and get it to where it is needed, because that's a resource that's already there, but is being wasted, along with the water and energy and human resources, along with that, costing our economy billions of rands. So there are other things we could explore as well.
And now, what are your closing remarks?
Yes, well, my closing remarks is that, for instance, I think that we should explore the food stamps, because if you can look, not only is unemployed or poor people who are regarded poor are the ones who are being affected by this issue, but it's actually, empirical that the last week towards payday, many people who are currently employed, they cannot even afford food, you understand? So these are the types of issues that we need to look into. And I also think that, for instance, there's other commitments. We have child support grant that can actually, is intended to alleviate these particular things. But we also see that there are other responsibilities that are very necessary in the household, that you find that the parents are actually now using the child support grant to, close the gap in the household. Yeah. And I also think that, one of the proposed ways that we can actually do it, we can actually pilot this particular thing of exempting tax from poultry, precisely looking into those that are buying using the SASSA card. Yeah. And then we can also become inclusive to include also other banks, just like that.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea, because if you have the SASSA card, you're already part of a list of people that are impoverished, yes, and that are in need of assistance. So that could be a way of vetting whether this person qualifies for VAT-exempted food items. But thank you so much for your time. That is FoodForwardSA's Managing Director, Andy du Plessis, as well as academic and co-author of the Township Economic Mistakes, Letswalo.